started to come across while doing my field work was, like I said at the start, the reuse or repurposing of ancient artifacts. At first, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I would see one or two examples, and I'd be like, okay, it's interesting, but I'm not quite sure what's going on. But I began, as I continued the survey work, I started to see it quite regularly in a lot of sites in northeast Thailand, and it made me start to rethink what was going on, or at least investigate it a little bit further. This is one example, or two examples. The Buddha image here, it looks to be Javarvati period, but they've placed a modern head on top. They obviously found it headless. And then this is a fragment of a Sema stone in front. So this is one example of this phenomenon. There's a few different types of reuse. One is basically reusing the object in the same way, or the original, in its original function. So you get quite a lot of examples of these ancient Javarvati Sema stones being reused in modern monasteries to make a Sema, which is actually, it's quite an interesting phenomenon. This is two examples. This is Tat Panom, which is the most famous stupa in northeast Thailand. The stupa itself, we're not sure. Its earliest it can be dated is about the 14th, 14th, 15th century maybe. This structure is actually quite modern. It collapsed in the 1970s and it was rebuilt. But there is evidence for occupation in this area right back into the Javarvati period. The same as right here. They've placed one on every on the cardinal point. So again, it's creating a boundary around the stupa. This is one of the best examples I've been able to find. This is a modern ubosat, ordination hall, that was built quite recently. And the monastery has collected up a lot of the old Javarvati Sema stones, and they've created a Sema with it. So basically reusing the ancient objects in the exact same way as they would have been used in antiquity. This is another phenomenon you see where they've taken an ancient Sema stone and they've recarved it. This is my rough translation on the left. Basically, it just gives the date and the information of when the Sema was laid out. So this one, it was done twice, so 1939 and then again in 1993. I presume this was carved in 1993. And it just gives practical information about which district it was in and what the name of the temple was and when the temple was founded and so forth. We also get Buddha images, like I showed at the start, being worshipped. So this is what Ban Gonsawan is again one of these moated sites where we have a lot of evidence for Sema stones, and again, I think the locals found this Buddha image. You can see it's unfinished. You can see from the feet and so forth, and they've actually built a separate what they call sala or pavilion in Thai to house it. It's quite interesting. This is where the meaning begins to shift a bit. This is a temple in Khon Kaen province. And again, you see these two Javarvati Sema stones. But here, they're not being used as boundary markers anymore. They're actually being used as part of the altar setup. So they start to become worshipped as objects in their own right. This is another example from Buriram province. This time they've, use a lot of gold leaf. Some of the faces have been recarved as well. And then the meaning starts to shift again. In Thailand, in every town, every city, you have what you call a Lak Muang, which is a town pillar shrine, which marks the exact center of the town. this is the Lac Muong here, and behind it is a Sema stone. So this is Galasin town, which is the closest provincial capital to Muang Faded. So they've taken a Sema stone from the archaeological site and set it up within the town shrine. And then this example here, they've actually taken the Sema and it's become the town pillar. So here the original meaning, original use of the Sema has completely changed and become a town pillar. This one on the left is quite interesting. It's set up at a fork in the road actually, and it's basically functioning as a village boundary marker. So they've similar meaning to its, or similar use to its original meaning. This is another. I found one or two examples of this. This has been recarved with what they call a doang, which is a horoscope. This is a modern example on the left. So again, we start to see Sema being used in different sort of non-Buddhist practices. Again, a very prevalent belief in Thailand is that of spirit worship. We usually call Pi. This example is from an excavation I worked on in central Thailand. This is one of the Sema stones that we had excavated around the mound. And when we got to the foundation levels of this earthen mound, we uncovered a lot of human burials. Up to that point, the villagers hadn't really paid much attention to us. But at that point, when we'd uncovered human inhumations, when we arrived at site the next morning, we found all these offerings on the Sema stone. So they're placating the spirits of the earth, the Chow Din or the Pi. We had, obviously awakened them. We also see conflicts and issues arising from this. The natural reaction of the Fine Arts Department of Thailand, or maybe most art historians or archaeologists, would be, when they find archaeological objects on sites, in villages and so forth, would be to bring them to museums, bring them to storehouses and so forth. There's obviously a lot of merit in doing that, but there's also conflict that can be, as I've tried to illustrate, these objects, they're not just archaeological or ancient objects to local people. They can be extremely invested in spiritual and religious beliefs. They also have their own traditions of knowledge around them as well. So another thing that I would get told by local monks or so forth, they would have a history of how the Sema stones got to their monastery, or were in the village, which would usually be I don't want to call it a mythical history in a negative sense, but it would not conform with history as we see it. And sometimes this is something I didn't document, but could probably document better if I went back. Sometimes you got similar stories repeated at different temples. So that's another interesting one. This is one very clear example of conflict of interest. That's archaeological or historically important sites around Thailand. The Fine Arts Department, who are responsible for maintaining archaeological sites, they put up these information boards like most countries do. And this is one particular, a pratat is a stupa. It's in the northeast Thailand and Laos. This is the term they use for them. And the Thai Fine Arts Department dated it, quite reasonably on stylistic grounds to the Ayutthaya period, which would be 12th, 13th century. Excuse me. But as you can see, the monks have come along and they've scribbled out the date. And they've also done it on the Thai language one as well. I'm going to try and get back here in 2 or 3 weeks' time, because the monks set up their own sign in Thai language, which gives a much earlier date. Basically dates this is the stupa in question, dates it to the time of the Buddha. Which is, I know. If any of you have been to Burma as well, you will hear a lot of similar stories. There's beliefs that the Buddha visited a lot of these sites. The Shwedagon, for example, in Myanmar, they believe that maybe the Buddha landed there, or there's different. Well, there's plenty of examples of, maybe not the Shwedagon, but there's Buddha footprints in certain areas. And this is a case here where the monks believe that during the time of the Buddha, he visited and deposited a relic. The reason why it's important for the monks is because, of course, their whole ability to draw pilgrims and worshippers to this stupa is reliant upon these narratives. If all of a sudden these narratives become undermined, people may actually stop visiting these stupas. So it is actually quite a contentious issue. The last example I want to give tries to bring these kind of questions into the museum world. Most of these objects, of course, were not made as works of art per se. They were sacred objects first. Today in museums and academia in particular, we tend to view them as works of art as opposed to sacred objects. And this is one of the best examples from Thailand. This is in Lopburi province, in Lopburi town actually. And this is called, I'll go back. This behind is a Khmer period monument, probably 10th, 11th century. And in 1993, the locals, they built this pavilion, and it's called the San Pragan, because it houses this local deity called Chao Po Pragan. But if you look at the statue itself, it is basically a Khmer period statue, probably what we refer to as Lopburi period, so 11th to 13th centuries, of Vishnu. And then they've put an Ayutthaya period head on top of it. And this is worshipped, let me go back. This is worshipped by the local people. It's basically the town tutelary deity. When a lot of art historians see this, they're quite aghast, that this very important Vishnu image is covered in gold leaf. It's been worshipped actively, but I would contrast it with this. This is the Gime, the Musée Gime, and I just wanted to put those two extreme contrasts. One, is a living, functioning, sacred object. The other is static in a museum. And I argue that in this case, you're forced to look at it as a work of art. I say that because if you look at the quite esoteric label that the French like to give, it says Cambodia, Ashram Maharosi. That's where it was found. This is a temple, a 7th century, 8th century temple, but it doesn't tell you that. It's in this district, it's in the province of Tak, and it's Phnom Da style. Well, there's probably about 50 people in the world who know what Phnom Da style is off the top of their head. I'm, a specialist in this area, and, I'm supposed to know what it is, and I kind of know. And it says 7th century, ? And the rest is sandstone. So for the average museum goer, the general public who's maybe never been to Southeast Asia but wants to, learn about it or experience it, they walk into the museum and this is what they're confronted with. And all the captions are like that. I don't even think there's text panels. So you're forced. The only way you can really look at it is you're meant to appreciate it aesthetically. So that, I think, is questionable. So this is the extreme contrast, I think. Also, recently I went and I visited a lot of the early Buddhist sites in India, and you see a similar phenomenon. I noticed that I was visiting these sites and I was viewing them historically. You know, I was very happy to get to them so I could look at the architecture, the construction, the layout, so forth. This is obviously a famous one just outside Vaishali with one of the Ashokan pillars. But then, of course, I kept meeting these Lao and Thai monks and pilgrims, and the history or what I was interested was completely different to them. They were there on a Buddhist pilgrimage. They circumambulate the stupas, and then they go on to the next one. These are, I think, either Chinese or Korean. So again, we have a similar process taking place in India today. And of course, this obviously happens in the West as well. People go to famous religious sites like basilicas in Rome or so forth. For some people, it's a religious experience. For some people, it's purely historic. But again, it just, I think it makes us, we need to maybe rethink some of the concepts of heritage. I've kind of put them as a versus here just to be a bit provocative. I think if you keep things in local communities, the heritage stays alive and it's unfixed. It can be dynamic, fluid, like the Sema. They can change meaning depending on how they're worshipped. Once we put them into a museum, usually they become static heritage. They're fixed. Okay, they're preserved, but they also become decontextualized. But there's negatives, right? If we leave them in local communities, there's preservation issues. They can get damaged, altered. Theft, of course, is a real problem. And they're inaccessible to people to study. If we put them in museums, of course, we can conserve them, study them, secured or accessible. But if we keep them in local communities, there's local agendas that can be developed and regional identities. Sometimes when we take things into national museums, they become part of nation-state meta-narratives and so forth. I think we need to give more consideration to mythical, legendary, traditional knowledge versus objective academic knowledge. I think there's room for both, and there should be ways of developing dialogues or integrating both types. All right, conclusion. Getting back to my original question, Buddhism is primarily distributed along the Chi River and the Middle Mekong during this period. By looking at Sema with narrative art, we can pinpoint more closely where this happens, and this is mainly the Chi River system. So what we see during this period is Buddhism spreading substantially into this area. So it seems that Buddhism, it's following pre-existing trade and communication routes, pre-existing settlement patterns. It's coming in and sort of Buddhicizing these areas. Why is this happening at moated sites? Because these are the places that can